July, a little unusual. But it was precipitated by a series of very interesting conversations I had recently with a woman who is quite amazing, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of other people. She is Dr. Rima. She was trained as a medical doctor, but has since departed from practicing allopathic medicine and has expanded into her own, I'll let her describe to you herself what she does, her own way of treating, product line, advisories, etc., including her own radio show. Welcome, Dr. Rima. How are you?
Thank you so much, Sophia. I am, while you're sweltering in the summer of the Northern Hemisphere, I'm in winter in the Southern Hemisphere in a nice woolly sweater. I'm well, thank you. And let me say that it is always a delight to talk to you. I learn a great deal, and our conversations are highly stimulating because of the quality of your thought and the way you gather information and process it. So it's always very exciting. I, by the way, never practiced allopathic medicine. On my very first day of medical school, my professor of pharmacology told the medical school class that every drug works the same way. Every drug, which of course is the whole point and purpose of allopathic medicine, the distribution of pharmaceuticals, every drug poisons enzyme systems. And given that enzyme systems are the very stuff of life, and that in every cell at every moment of our bodies there are about 35,000 enzymatic processes being carried out at the same time, it made no sense to me to use drugs. But in order to be graduated as an allopathic physician and get my license, I had to learn what it was that they wanted to teach us. But I never practiced it. I've practiced drug-free psychiatry and medicine since my graduation from medical school.
Now that you remind me, that's right. I remember you explained this before, and I'm very admiring of that kind of a decision, because you're really pushing a big rock uphill when you're one of the few people that resolves to do that. And if that's ever made known, you get severely, I would imagine, ostracized, criticized, and all of that good stuff, right?
You could say that, yes.
But you are a brave woman, Dr. Rima. I mean, anyone can tell that just from the way you talk. And it's great that you've persevered and you've been around doing all this for so long, and that you're kind of a leader in this field, I would say.
Thank you. I would like to let people know that my communications and my blogs and my ebooks and my articles and my presentations are available at the website of the Natural Solutions Foundation, of which I am the medical director. And the Natural Solutions Foundation principal website is Dr. Rima Truth Reports. That's DRRIMA, truthreports.com. And it's all about truth. You are suffused by lies in almost every area in which anybody is trying to communicate with you officially. And if they're using technology, they're probably lying to you. So finding the truth is incredibly important. And that's what I admire about you, Sophia. You dive for the truth no matter where it leads, no matter how murky and messy and dirty the water is, where you have to swim to find the truth. And that's what I do. And that's what Ralph Usatola, my co-trustee, and General Burt, the president of our foundation, do. It's about truth. And we make every effort to present it, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. And it's uncomfortable.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm glad we're chatting. And now we should stop patting each other on the back and
Yes.
get busy with this show. So, I like to go step by step, and I like to think for my listeners as well while I'm hearing what my guest says. And so the first question I'd like to ask you, so that we leave no stones unturned or unexplained, is you said a little while ago that in med school you were told that every drug poisons enzyme systems. So I'm going to ask you, could you quickly define what an enzyme is?
Enzymes are little protein machines. If you imagine a transformer toy that can turn from one thing into another, it has joints and it moves. Well, think about a protein that is specifically constructed to pick up something and move it somewhere and drop it, and then go back and pick up that same something again and go over, put it somewhere and drop it again. That little action is the entire reason that the little protein machine exists. It's a kind of robot, a bio-robot, if you will, and the activity of the body, the capacity to carry out biochemical actions, generate energy, digest, think, walk, talk, live, all of that depends on these tiny little bio-robots moving something and picking it up and moving it someplace else. And they do this action endlessly until they wear out, and then they're replaced by another set of robots that make new ones, a new replacement enzyme when it's needed that does the same thing. It's like a super automated factory where the robots repair themselves. That is the mechanism of life, of movement, of metabolism, of building up and of tearing down cells. If you think about the fact that we have about 10 trillion cells, not counting the bacteria in our gut, which are doing the same thing, but they're on their own for this discussion. If you think about the fact that we have about 10 trillion cells, and at every moment, the processes of the cells, including their mitochondria, the enzymatic processes include about 35,000 simultaneous enzymatic operations, that little robot thing that I talked about, 35,000 times all of the, or repetitions by different enzymes of all of the things that they do. You think about poisoning enzymes and you say, well, that can't be good. And you're right. It can't be good. It's not good. Now, do herbs and nutrients poison enzymes? No. They work in a totally different direction. They support the enzymatic function. They support the metabolic functions. They support the healthy functioning of this whole system, which is why herbs and vitamins and molecules like CBD and nanosilver, magnesium, iodine, support health and restore health, whereas drugs interfere with health and destroy health.
Okay, that was a very good explanation. And what you actually said in the beginning was, quoting this other person, this instructor, I would imagine, is that drugs poison enzyme systems, and that really is a problem, because that's the whole mechanism, the mechanisms, plural, being compromised.
Yes.
And then you don't have metabolic balance.
Correct. You don't have homeostasis, and without homeostasis, you have illness, and you have decline, you have decay, you have eventually death. Let me point out that this little robot that I talked about, the bio-robot, puts that something, let's say a molecule, into the next bio-robot, which then does something with it and sends it on to the next, and the next one carries out a process with it. So there's a cascade of events, and if you stop that cascade anywhere, everything downstream, and it's quite complicated, everything downstream is screwed up. Now, let's talk just for one quick moment about a very common class of psychiatric drugs, SSRI inhibitors. It turns out that people who take these so-called antidepressants, which don't work and cause horrible brain damage that's quite permanent, also tend to develop bone cancer more than other people who aren't taking these same drugs. Why? Well, it turns out that the same SSRI receptors that are messed around with in the brain are very, very frequently found in the membrane that covers every bone in our body, the periosteum or near bone membrane. And so when you interfere with those, you change a whole different cascade that has nothing to do with mood, but has everything to do with the biochemical cascade health of that part of the body. These things are also found in the gut. Mother Nature is very thrifty. She does not waste anything. So the fact that we think of an enzyme or a synapse functioning in the brain with certain enzymes doesn't mean that it's not also happening in the gut, which is very much like the brain, that it's not also happening in the bones or the muscles or the eye tissue. So we, in our naivete, think that we can play enzyme God with drugs and with organ transplants, and we are wrong.
Yeah, well, of course, but I don't, the whole model of allopathic medicine and the way that it's been sold to the public is that it's a solution bringer. And it's bringing solutions from a different kind of place, you could say, from drugs, chemicals, man-made compounds. And man is so smart that he has figured out how to put B, C, D, and Q, R, S together, and it's a pill, and you pop it, and that's it. You're going to be fixed.
It does bring solutions. It brings solutions to too many people on the planet. It's a depopulation tool. John D. Rockefeller Jr., the genius of pharmaceutical medicine, as well as many other things, was also a leading depopulationist. He introduced eugenics to Germany, as a matter of fact. It's a solution to a corporate wet dream, which is be the largest industry on the planet, and that's what the pharmaceutical industry is, by inducing illness and then convincing us that the cause is something different, but the cure is, the problem is always a deficit of the drug. We need the drug in order to be well. The entire planetary population is being sickened. Of course, vaccines help that process along, made by the same people, is being sickened and is being fleeced of its health, of its vitality, of its reproductive capacity, and of its money.
Yes, thank you for reminding us of that. Now, those very interesting discussions that we had recently began because I have someone close to me that's been going through what is said to be kidney failure and was on dialysis. And I tried to be of help and suggest some alternative ways to boost kidney and overall health with certain products that were herb and mineral based. And ultimately, dialysis was resorted to, and at that point I didn't offer anything else except for moral support. And as you and others explained to me, dialysis, peritoneal, which is the lower level of at-home dialysis that they offer you, versus hemodialysis, where you have to go to a center 3 times a week for 3.5 hours or so. The peritoneal dialysis involves putting an actual open wound in the abdominal cavity with a shunt, and then pumping during the night, usually, a dialysate fluid mixture, that's what it's called, into the peritoneum, and this supposedly does the same job or an almost equivalent job to what the kidneys do. And when I later looked into this, I was absolutely appalled. On first hearing the very, superficial description from someone that is also close to this person who's close to me, I thought, how could that work? But then when I read about it, I was really thunderstruck, because I can't imagine that anyone would think that this actually works. And so I talked to you about it, and you explained an aspect that I had forgotten, which was the osmotic exchange between cell and blood vessel barriers. But I'm going to go into the construction of the peritoneum and describe it, and then describe what I've learned, and you can feed back in any way you like. So here's what I learned. Inside the body, first of all, I'm going to throw in a little Chinese medicine that I learned the other day. The kidneys are the deepest organs, the most protected organs we have. They are literally the basement of the soul in Chinese medicine, right? And they are harbored deep in our body. They are doing the job of filtration of the blood. They get 25% of the cardiac output right out of the aorta. And they each have 2 million nephrons in them, which are these tiny filtration, you could just say pockets. And their job is actually intelligent, I learned, in that they know to return the minerals back to the bloodstream. They filter the waste products, but they return the minerals. So in this dialysis, the peritoneum is like an apron. It's like a barrier, a tissue barrier. It runs from basically your throat down to the bottom of your hips. And it protects or buffers your internal organs, which are on one side of it, your vital organs, from your abdominal wall, your abdominal muscles. And the peritoneum has 2 layers. There is the parietal peritoneum, which rides alongside the abdominal wall and the muscles. And then there is the visceral peritoneum on the other side, which abuts the vital organs. Now, the visceral peritoneum itself has 2 layers, and it is called the mesentery. And I learned that in that mesentery are the blood vessels and the nerves that feed the vital organs. So peritoneal dialysis involves penetrating into that mesentery and flooding it with this bath of dialysate, the fluid that comes in bags to your house. It's delivered every week in bags, which are in cardboard boxes, a tower of boxes. And this fluid is pumped into you while you're sleeping or trying to, and it bathes those blood vessels, and its content is sodium chloride, NaCl, table salt, sodium acetate, potassium chloride, and some magnesium chloride, and a little glucose in some instances. So what you explained to me, Dr. Rima, which I had forgotten, was that the exchange of the materials, the intracellular materials, which contain wastes, and nutrients and enzymes, which the cells are trying to use, and what's in the small blood vessels, the semi-permeable blood vessels, the capillary level, that they're delivering oxygen and nutrients and all these important building materials to the cells, that there's an exchange through that semi-permeable membrane. And that exchange goes on all the time. So when that exchange is going into this dialysate fluid, in my understanding, the cells are losing half of their important materials too all the time. Is that not correct?
Well, look at it this way, Sophia. If the glomeruli, those tiny little filtration systems, the intelligent filtration systems in the kidney, if they were not necessary, you remember that I said Mother Nature is thrifty, we wouldn't have them. She wouldn't have wasted the energy on creating them, and the energy that they take, oh my goodness, and the energy that they take to run. So they do something that simple peritoneal dialysis and filtration doesn't do, or we wouldn't have kidneys and we wouldn't have nephrons. And what they do is mineral sparing. As you said, they save the minerals. What they also do is to selectively get rid of toxins, poisons, things that don't belong there and save not only minerals but nutrients as well. Otherwise, 25% of the cardiac output would be stripped of its nutrients every time the heart beat, and we would very soon be in very, very bad shape. So, when we substitute the peritoneal sac, and that's what it is, it's a double sac. When we substitute the peritoneal sac for the kidneys, we lose a lot. Not only do we lose the comfort of sleeping without a port into our bellies and the potential for infection and so on, so on, so on, we also lose the potential or the possibility of decent kidney function. Now, if people are in fact in dire straits and they're in kidney failure, well then, maybe that's an exchange we have to make. But as you and I have spoken about, there are an awful lot of people around the world who are being told that they're in kidney failure, who we have to ask some questions about. And by the way, one of the reasons that people go into kidney failure in large numbers is the agrochemicals that they are either exposed to when they're growing food using Roundup and nicotinamide agrochemicals, pesticides, herbicides, etc., or in their foods when they eat the foods that have been grown with these things, and their kidneys are then poisoned by them. So we're talking about an industrial environmental catastrophe in those people who actually do have kidney failure, and an iatrogenic atrocity in those people who do not have kidney failure. And let me add one other factoid here that I think is relevant. Now, the situation you're dealing with is in a country with a nationalized health service. So what I'm about to say does not apply, but it does apply to the United States. And that is that there are only two classes of physicians who are permitted to profit from the drugs that are sold to their patients. If I write a prescription, I never write prescriptions, but let's assume I were to write a prescription, you would take it to the drugstore if you didn't understand that you shouldn't fill prescriptions. But you would take it to the drugstore and somebody would make a profit from selling you that drug, but by law it can't be the doctor, unless the doctor is a medical oncologist selling you chemotherapy drugs, or a dialysis doctor selling you dialysate and dialysis drugs, and so on. A study was done of European dialysis patients where the doctor cannot, by law, make any money from the sale of the drugs, and U.S. dialysis patients. And it was concluded that these doctors had studied together at the same institutions. They were using the same material and the same dialysis techniques and machines and so on, but U.S. patients were dying 600% more than the patients in Europe using the same machines and treated by people trained exactly the same as the U.S. doctors. And it was determined that the U.S. patients were receiving 6 times as many drugs. And then you ask, well, who benefits? The U.S. dialysis doctors were asked whether the fact that they make a profit from every kidney dialysis prescription and drug issued, whether that had anything to do with their decision making, and 100% of them said no. Everything I do is in the best interest of the patient. And yet equivalent patients were 6 times as likely to die under the hands of the American dialysis doctors as they were under the hands of the identically trained European doctors who made no money from the dialysis process other than their salaries as employees. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that the escalating number of people who are told that they have symptom-free kidney failure. They're urinating, they're putting out sufficient urine, they don't have neural toxicity, they don't have itching skin, they don't have all the other signs of kidney failure, but they're told that they need to be on dialysis. Well, we have to ask whether that's in the best interest of the patient or not.
Now, these symptom-free kidney failure patients, I have actually spoken to different people who are on dialysis as I've become more and more curious about it. And I've asked them, are you peeing? And the answer is yes. Is it normal? Yes. Does it look the same? Is it the same amount? And they say yes. And so
the question can't be for people who are on dialysis. Are you peeing? Is it normal? Does it have the same pH and so on? The question has to be for people who have been told they need dialysis. Are you peeing? Is it a normal volume? Is it a normal color? What's the pH? What's the specific gravity? Is all that normal? And if it's normal, then how can you be in kidney failure? Because if they're in dialysis, you've introduced volume to what they will be putting out.
Okay, I'll correct myself. I meant dialysis candidates.
Okay.
And then one person was already on dialysis whom I asked. That's why I mixed them all up together. But yes, I asked that question and then it puzzled me. Well, what is kidney failure? So there was a test that's typically done to see this CK level in urine. Now CK, creatine kinase, there are 3 different kinds. It's a muscle enzyme involved in the regeneration of ATP, and its 3 forms are they originate from different muscles. So the striated skeletal muscles produce one type of CK, and there's a molecular way of distinguishing, but I haven't written those down. And then there is the hard or smooth muscle that produces a certain kind of CK, and then there's the brain. So the CK that shows up in your urine is typically when the striated muscles are leaking myoglobin, their protein that carries the oxygen from the cell wall over to the nucleus.
Right.
So this is an indication, not necessarily of kidney failure when you have high CK in the urine, but of muscle cell wall degeneration, because you've got
there's that too. There's that too. But think about the fact that these nephrons, these little filtration pockets in the kidney, are supposed to keep the CK from leaking out. Now, the problem is not the CK necessarily. It's the fact that the nephron's function has degraded to the point where it can't filter it out, where the mesh has become too large and things are leaking through. So they use that as an indicator. There's always striated muscle breakdown. Cells are always being broken down and they're always being repaired. So there'll always be a certain level of creatine phosphate, kinase rather, being produced. The question is what happens to it. And if it's allowed to leak through, it's a general indication that the kidney nephrons are not doing their job, in the same way that we hear a lot about cesium-134 and cesium-137 from, for instance, Fukushima, as if the only thing that we have to be concerned with is the cesium-134. No, that's an indicator molecule because it's only produced in nuclear reactors. It does not occur in nature. And therefore, the cesium is used as a general measure. If there are 60 billion becquerels of cesium-134 in the bluefin tuna, that's the wrong number, but if there's an elevated radiation level of cesium-134 in the bluefin tuna, that's the indicator that they're measuring, but every other radioactive isotope that was produced in Fukushima will also be high in the bluefin tuna. It's just the index molecule that they follow, in the same way that the CK level of striated muscle is the index molecule that, or index level of that molecule that is followed. And it's taken to be a general indication of general glomerular failure.
Yes, I understand that. So on a daily basis, as we go through the motions of life, depending on the demands placed on the body, some people like construction workers, I spoke to a baggage handler for Southwest Airlines, and he told me that he heaves and moves and carries and drops 12,000 pounds of luggage a day, and he's in his 50s.
And it's all mine, and he broke everything in the suitcase.
No, I've seen that. No, he was an older guy, and I'm sure he was respectful of people's luggage, but I was stunned to hear how much physical work he does over the course of a day. And by the way, I sold him magnesium cream, and he tried it out. He put a little on his knee, and then he came running back to me, and he said, "Give me more of that." And the pain had gone away in a minute or two. So that was good news. Anyway, so the amount of work, the demands placed on the body also indicate the level of waste materials.
Of course.
And if the kidneys are doing their job, then you'll have the proper level showing in the urine. They test the urine for CK, and that's an indicator of whether you have kidney failure or, as I tried to bring up a little earlier, whether you have muscle cell wall failure on an epidemic level, which can also be a condition. That's produced, you're the one who clued me in, by statin drugs. Statin drugs blow holes in the cell walls. They literally blow out, they're gunners for cholesterol. They'll blow the cholesterol out of the endothelium in the blood vessels, and they will definitely create now leakage of...
There is a condition named rhabdomyolysis in which the muscle cells are lysed or broken apart and it's caused by, among other things, statin drugs. Now, if you have enough rhabdomyolysis going on to cause pain, you might go to your doctor, and your doctor might actually make the diagnosis and might be smart enough to say you have to stop the statin drugs immediately. But if it's subclinical and you don't have pain, or if you don't go to the doctor when you have the pain, or if the doctor misses the diagnosis, you will have lots and lots of cell wall damage, leading to lots and lots of striated muscle CK in your kidneys, and the doctor will very likely say, "Oh, look at that, you're in kidney failure," never thinking, why do you have this elevated CK level? Could the problem be exactly as you're saying, Sophia, a cell wall issue which is just showing up in a downstream test?
Right. And I did a newsletter recently on rhabdomyolysis, or rhabdo as it's popularly referred to, because it's becoming a little more noticeable now in the society due to an explosion of the fastest growing gym in the world, which is called CrossFit. And CrossFit was started by Greg Glassman from the San Fernando Valley. He was very adept at cross-training. And he was a little bit of a difficult personality, but very good at his various programs that he posted online, his programs to create the uber fit athlete. And CrossFit has taken off like a rocket. It's receiving 150 applications for franchises every month. There are hundreds in California. They're exploding all over the world. And they're equipped with all different kinds of training equipment, from rings to the dumbbells to you do a huge number of different motions in order to promote all 10 kinds of adeptness and functionality and strength. There's a CrossFit motto, which is "do not quit." And one of the training methodologies or workout methods is to partner with someone. So let's say you and I, Dr. Rima, we go to the gym, and we're going to do a workout together, a partner workout. So let's say we're concentrating on our upper body. and we're going to do pull-ups and push-ups and bench press, and I do 10 of this particular thing, you do 10. Then I do another 10, you do another 10, I do another 10, you do another 10. Then we go over to the bench and we press, and I do 10, you do 10. Then we go to another thing, we do pull-ups, 10, 10, 10, 10. So the idea is you don't want to be bested by your partner. The best case scenario, you and your partner want to quit when you're both fatigued and you can't do another set. But you don't want to be the loser, right? So this is what promotes the over effort in a lot of people. They will do just one more set. They will grind through the pain. In fact, I was reading some blogs by CrossFit, the CrossFit adherents, and one doctor, she was a gynecologist, she actually posted a comment that in her opinion, as a medical doctor, it's perfectly fine to lose control of your bladder while you're doing a CrossFit workout.
Oh! Oh! Oh!
Yeah, and so people have rendered themselves incapacitated by the extent to which they push in these CrossFit gyms, and they're proud of it. And that some of them have ended up with spinal cord injury in wheelchairs, but it appears that many of them develop, after the workout, rhabdomyolysis. So the typical scenario is they will leave their workout spent, their muscles will be wobbling like jelly, and they'll run home or drive home and jump in a bathtub of ice and rest the next day. But in certain instances, the muscles that are wobbling like jelly don't recover and they inflame. Now you get these big sacs of fluid inflammation in, let's say it's your upper body, in your arms. And then the next morning you can't even brush your teeth. And then you go to the ER and they say, my God, you have rhabdomyolysis. And they test your CK, which can sometimes be as high as 50, 100,000. And they say, well, you've got muscle cell death because your cells explode at that point. They go through all their different choices, your muscle cells, when they're put on such great demand for work, that they'll go through their respiration, they'll go through fermentation, and then they'll actually eat their own proteins, because muscle cells know how to ship their proteins to the liver, and then they come back as glucose, and they can make a little more fuel. But when they expend all their different options, they will just outright die. Boom. Sudden death of the muscle cells. And the reason why the muscle cells have these different possibilities at their disposal, some extreme, like using their own proteins to consume themselves, is because, let's say you're lost in the wilderness, you have no food, you're starving. You could use that extra bit, that last ditch effort of the body to consume itself, to crawl back to a place where you can find, shelter or rescue.
This is a primitive survival mechanism from our evolutionary course when extreme hunger, deprivation, and fatigue were related to efforts to survive. Absolutely. There's no question about this. This is an adaptive capacity because the body thinks about the immediate survival. We're supposed to be smart enough to think about long-term well-being, but obviously we are showing recidivism to primitive thought processes at the CrossFit gyms.
Right, and it's become, the trend. It's cool to be doing CrossFit and to say you can do CrossFit. CrossFit, in the old days, just recently, triathletes were considered the super athletes of our time because they did swim, bike, run. But the CrossFit people, they actually do power workouts. It's not endurance stuff, it's power stuff. And you see them lifting all this, and then they jump to the rings and they can do this, and they're a very certain special build. They're wiry and very tight, and they tend not to be huge, but a little smaller, but extremely tough people. And the spirit, as Glassman says, you're not going to believe this, but he says that he is building people of the future. And by doing his CrossFit workout, you're preparing yourself for war, earthquake, a diagnosis of leukemia.
What?
Yeah. You're mentally preparing yourself for the worst. This is the supposed what is it called? Mission statement, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so just to cover the range of what can cause rhabdomyolysis, it can be caused by crush injury. When you're pinned under a bus in an accident or under debris in an earthquake, your body, with the pressure on your limb or limbs, the muscle cells will crush, and the enzymes will leak out, the CK and the myoglobin, and show up in your urine if you're rescued. Now, marathon running is another thing that can produce rhabdo, and I ran a marathon, I'm sorry to say, I was very undertrained. I did it, but it was a stupid thing to do. And after I finished, I went to the bathroom, and typically, if you have rhabdomyolysis, you have high CK in your urine, it will be the color of coffee or Coca-Cola. And that's what I saw in the toilet. And I just never saw anything this color before. And I decided, well, I just must be very dehydrated. I didn't know that I was seeing the sign of CK. And I'll tell you, my body was in a mess for a long time afterwards. I never went for medical help because I didn't know, but I did recover. And so marathon running, snake bite, heat stroke, there are many different conditions that can cause a group of muscles, or if it's systemic, in the case of the statin drugs, can cause this degeneration of the cell walls and the enzyme CK and the myoglobin to...
Now, there's a very important interactive piece of information here that I think needs to be added to your accurate description of rhabdomyolysis. And that is that when the muscle membranes break down and the muscle protein leaks into the blood, the kidney is capable of filtering it out and dealing with it if it's not overwhelming. If it is overwhelming, as in the cases you're describing, or if there is a subclinical compromise to kidney functioning to begin with, or something else is going on to begin with, then what will happen is that the myoglobin and the CK will actually poison the kidney. So you start out with the kidney functioning well, or well enough to keep these things from leaking out. And then if the concentration is too high, you do in fact poison the glomeruli, the little filtration pockets, and you wind up with dysfunctional kidneys, which can progress because of the rhabdomyolysis, which can progress to genuine kidney failure. But the point that I think you're making is that there are things that happen in life, sometimes things that we choose to do, like the baggage handler's job or the CrossFit training, and sometimes things that we don't choose to do, like getting trapped under a bus, which can cause the CK elevation to happen without kidney failure, but if it's high enough, it will produce kidney failure.
Right. Now, I have friends, close friends, on statin drugs, and they refuse to listen to reason. They are losing what Dr. Seneff, you know Stephanie Seneff from MIT?
Yes.
She is really, really good at
She's excellent.
She's amazing, and she's written a very long article on statin drugs. That's after you told me about the statin drugs and the systemic rhabdomyolysis. I looked it up on the internet, and I read her very long article, and I took my time reading that. But it's an amazing piece of work, and it explains everything about how the cell wall uses energy, how it makes energy, and how the cell wall starts becoming permeable instead of semi-permeable, as you taught me. And that's a whole different ball game. So anyway.
Could you please send me, for my education, could you send me Dr. Seneff's article link?
Yeah, I absolutely will. And I'll even send you my newsletter that I wrote on this.
Great,
because
thank you.
I started out by CrossFit. Okay, so you're not going to believe this, but I'm familiar with a building in San Diego, which is a corporate office building, but it's not, the big towering skyscraper that you might picture. It's a 2-story maybe at most, and it's kind of in a cool design district. And in one of these corporate offices, there are large windows, and there are these 2 or 3 looming giant rubber figures that are looking out the windows, kind of like reaching. They have arms extended. They're very muscular. They're huge, about 7 feet tall easily, and bulging muscles, and they're green. They look like monsters, but they're actually clowns. And this is Rhabdo the clown. It is the mascot of CrossFit. And in the complete pictorial representation of Rhabdo the clown, he's standing in a pool of blood, and he's got his guts spilled on the floor around his feet, including kidneys, and he's hooked to a dialysis machine. So this is the mascot of the CrossFit.
I have my mouth hanging open. My mouth hanging open. And while we're talking, I am going to open up a browser, and I am going to look for Rhabdo the clown. This is quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. This is a level of craziness that you have to work hard to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what those clowns were for a long time, and when children pass, they point them out, and their parents take pictures of them, and everybody crows and shouts with glee and amusement. But this is a dark mascot.
This is a very dark. I'm looking on. I thought I had turned my cell phone off, and I am turning it off again. Rhabdo. Yes, I see Uncle Rhabdo.
That's right, Uncle Rhabdo, sometimes also called Pupy the Clown.
Pupy the Clown. Yes. This is crazy. This is beyond bonkeroonies. This is very scary crazy.
But this is our new fitness craze.
Well, yes, this is our new fitness craze. And what I'm doing right now is I am taking this particular Rhabdo, the clown, Uncle Rhabdo, and I don't understand why I cannot turn my phone off. That's strange. Okay, power off. We'll try that. I'm taking this image and I will post it. I will reference your article, and I will post this picture on Dr. Rima Truth Reports and discuss the manufactured insanity of this. But the problem, Sofia, as you well recognize, is that Uncle Rhabdo and the CrossFit model of insane disproportion is resonating with something profound in the society, or people wouldn't do this. They would say, as you and I are saying, this is crazy. Oh my, this is bonkers, and they wouldn't go near it. It's resonating with something.
Well, okay, you're the psychiatrist. So in CrossFit, there are different workouts. There's a workout for pregnant women, a workout for the elderly, a workout for, I guess even children if you bring them in, workout for fat people. There's a Navy SEAL workout. And one of the things that Greg Glassman said in an interview was, SEALs won't do the fat people's workout, but fat people want to do the SEAL workout. So there's this overreaching. When we were little, my mother would say to us, your eyes are bigger than your stomach.
And my mother too. everybody's mother.
And so today, this eyes bigger than the stomach syndrome seems to me the reason why people they buy what they can't afford. You know what I'm saying? They want to be what they can't get to overnight.
Well, I think we're talking about something very profound here, Sophia. I think what we're talking about is that when you have lost touch with your body, with your emotions, with your psyche, with your innate ability to regulate yourself and eat healthily and regulate your inner and outer functions. When you've lost touch, you can be pushed and shoved, and you can be motivated by fantasy that doesn't have feet in reality. So I am overweight, and I want to be, and I'm older than I think I should be in terms of the way I look and feel. And so I want a magic solution, and I go into a gym like this with great advertising and great marketing, and I have no touch with what my body actually wants to do or what's helpful for it or how to eat in order to become regulated rather than dysregulated. And so I leap into a magic carriage of, in this case, CrossFitness or a new pair of shoes or a fashion handbag or the latest supplement. And now, Shazam, I'm magically transported into a different state of being because I have no connection with my own state of being. I have no connection with my body. I have no connection with the emotions that I've been distracted and fluoridated and drugged out of feeling and educated out of feeling because I'm a product of the core curriculum, and I'm not taught to think, to feel, to discern. I'm taught to respond emotionally and not question. So I'm separated from myself by my toxic food, by my toxic entertainment, by the toxic microwaves in my environment, and by my toxic inputs from advertising and from manipulation. And of course I'm going to go do something magical and insane. And of course the appearance of Uncle Rhabdo prostrate with fatigue, with his organs, including his kidneys, literally dropping out of his body, that's not going to bother me. It's going to go past my sensitivities because they're so dulled. How can I be insensitive? How can I be sensitive to anything when my pineal gland, my moral compass, has been calcified by the fluoride in my water and probably in the dialysate liquid too?
That's a very good analysis. And I'm going to ask you another question. By the way, Greg Glassman and CrossFit have 80 in-house lawyers. 80. And
that's like Monsanto.
Never lost a lawsuit, have had Rhabdo lawsuits, never lost a lawsuit, and they do believe that the incorporation of the clown figure as the mascot, Rhabdo the clown in particular, is disclosure of the possibilities. Now, I'm not going to fault Glassman and CrossFit necessarily. I fault the user as well, because I'll tell you this, I'm going to ask you this as a psychiatrist. I've been very athletic all my life, and there are times when I've really pushed it. And what happens immediately when you cross a certain tolerance barrier in the tissues, you get a twinge or a twang. You get a sharp warning pain. You get a, hey, you're hurting me. And then it's your option to keep doing what you're doing or to let up and do it, to a little lower intensity.
But the culture of athletic performance is push past the pain. It's the CrossFit culture. You want to get that score. You want to break that record. You want to do what your buddy is doing, and you want to drive each other, and everybody on the team is looking toward you. Push that body. It's
Exactly.
crazy.
And
It's
they
crazy.
have coaches and a clock, and then your other team members. And this is catching on. The 24-hour fitness, they have the Ignite team now, and you're encouraged to show up at 6 in the morning and do a team workout and play off each other, just like that. And so this team workout thing is really, really erupting everywhere. And I think psychologically, you can be taken into zones where you're not your own advocate in terms of your physical limitations. And this is because seriously, once you get injured, it can be bad news. You can have a layup of several weeks, and then you can't do what you want to do, and you have to shuffle around and either take painkillers or anti-inflammatories or, rest, and that's no fun. But to actually push to the point that your cells explode and die, this I don't understand.
Think about how people live in terms of connection and disconnection. Most people have their major connections on devices, on their computer, their Instagram, their Facebook, and that's connection. And of course, there's a piece missing. It's the human piece. And of course, people are biologically and psychologically meant to be pack animals. We are healthy in a community. We are unhealthy in a community. Now, there are plenty of sick communities and dysfunctional families and so on, but our biology and our psychology is designed for group functioning with individual capacity within the group. And we're not very happy, very healthy, or very well integrated. We are separated from an essential part of ourselves when we are isolated. And this is isolating. So now we have people literally tearing their bodies apart based on what you're describing in order to be part of a team. This is like a rebound phenomenon, I think, to compensate for the desperate despair of isolation, whether or not you're taking pictures of your food and posting it on Facebook, which is not a relationship. So I'm wondering whether what we're seeing isn't a some kind of inchoate attempt to balance what is so profoundly imbalanced. And if I have to sacrifice good sense and physical comfort and health, which I'm pretty disconnected from anyhow, or I wouldn't be eating the crap that I think is food from the industrialized food system, if I'm so separated from health and so separated from others, but I can have a team, I can have a group of people that I can do something with excitement and endorphins and dopamine and feel something with other people, then I'll show up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I'll bust my muscle cells open for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand what you're saying. In fact, I saw a parent and her 2 children the other day, and they had gone over to the hut at this facility. It was an athletic facility, to the grill area, and gotten something to eat. And then the mom gave the boy back his cell phone, and he looked at it and he goes, "Mom, did you take a picture of the French fries?" And I guess she did. And it struck me as very odd that a mother would take a picture of French fries with her son's phone. Who cares about the French fries? And you would email this to someone? It just doesn't make any sense to me how crazy these behaviors are, but they've become standard in our society.
I live in Chile, and I can't tell you whether what I'm about to describe is common in the United States at this point or not, because I haven't been there for a while, but my guess is that it is. So we go to a restaurant, and we're having lunch or dinner or a coffee shop, and a family walks in. Mom, dad, 1, 2, 3, 4 kids, and they sit down at the table, and they're all on their cell phones. They're all on their cell phones. Maybe mom and dad are talking about what to order. Maybe they're not, but they're all on their cell phones. And they're all on their cell phones through the entire meal. And they're chatting with people and their thumbs are flying. And they're all on their cell phones. They are together in a completely isolated manner.
Yeah, we see that. It happens here all the time. And it's just such a strange thing for me. It's so strange when you're grouped together with people and they pretend to be listening to what you're saying in actual conversation, because I don't participate in that second dimensional world that's constantly going in the background or the foreground, as the case may be. And these other people, their eyes are darting to their phone to see who has said what to them in this other conversation.
Or who has sent them a picture of their French fries.
That's right. That's the level of our societal communication, as you say. And then you pointed out that going into a facility and doing these exercises in this very extreme way, and it is said of CrossFit that you have a sense of brotherhood there and camaraderie and joinder with others through the effort, the excessive physical efforts that you all make together, and then you encourage each other to push past the barriers.
Let's talk about the physiology of bonding. When we produce extreme effort, we produce endorphins, we produce enkephalins, we produce dopamine, and we produce oxytocin. Oxytocin is the molecule of bonding. When a baby is born, everybody in the room produces oxytocin. That's the nurses, the doctors, the janitor cleaning up the goo on the floor, the dad, the mom. Everybody produces oxytocin and they bond to that baby. The mom and dad go home with the baby and they get to continue their bonded relationship. The doctors and nurses are deprived of continuing the bond, and having worked in hospitals and having made some, I think, fairly accurate observations about OBGYN personnel, I can tell you that the psychological cost to them is profound, but never mind. Anyhow, everybody is bonding with everybody. Now, what happens to these people who are making an effort, who are exposing their frailties, who are celebrating their triumphs, who are competing with one another, who are brothers in Uncle Rhabdo destruction, and they all share this special experience. They have special clothes that they wear. They have special understandings. They have special memberships and special workouts, and they're all so special. Of course they bond. They bond in pain, they bond in oxytocin, and they bond in shared craziness, from what you're telling me.
No, I understand that a puppy or a newborn baby would evoke or provoke or elicit the production of oxytocin. And I want to ask you a question about that in a minute. But how does a gym workout do that?
When you produce extreme physical activity, and there is an emotional environment and there are other people involved, it's one of the times, like when you climb a mountain together, you and the person or people on your team have shared an experience, and there is a flux of neurotransmitters, including dopamine, which people need for their immune system function, including endorphins and enkephalins, which people need for their immune system functioning, and including oxytocin. When people meditate, they develop oxytocin. And that feeling of universal bliss and oneness and love is actually an expression of the level of oxytocin that was released. Gurus typically have what we call the Buddha belly when they've been meditating successfully for a long time, and they also have wide pelvises, even though genetically the line of people that they come from might have narrow pelvises. Why is that? It's because oxytocin, among many other things, actually softens the ligaments of the pelvis. That's why women who are pregnant have an easier time delivering babies, because the pelvis has literally expanded through the softening of the ligaments because of the oxytocin that the woman feels or produces when she feels love and connection with the gestating baby. We're designed for that. So at the same time that the pelvic ligaments soften and widen, allowing the bones to separate, the rectus abdominis muscles of the stomach are softened so that the growing fetus can protrude, giving you the look of a normal pregnant woman. Well, that's what a Buddha belly is in a successful guru who's been sitting around meditating, producing oxytocin for 20, 25 years in his ashram or tent or whatever. He literally softens the rectus abdominis muscles, and that's why they look pregnant. We think of it as the Buddha belly, but really they look the same as a pregnant woman does. What is that? That's oxytocin. And you can get it a lot of different ways, just like you can get rhabdomyolysis a lot of different ways. Mother Nature is thrifty. She uses the same mechanisms over and over in different ways. It's like me with leftovers. You know, last night I have lamb chops. There's lamb left over. Today I have a frittata with the lamb that was left over from the lamb chops. I'm thrifty. Mother Nature is a whole lot thriftier because she's a whole lot smarter than I am. And so what we're talking about is brotherhood, suffering, bonding. Yeah. It's kind of like the connection between doctors or young people in medical school or in the military. They're all suffering together, and so they bond.
That makes a lot of sense, especially what you said about the pelvis, because I learned many years ago that in the 10th week of pregnancy, your pelvis actually widens, and that's the stage, the threshold on which that oxytocin has been produced. It's past the first few months of sickness and discomfort maybe, and you get into a more rosy state, happy state, and you make the oxytocin. Very interesting about the gurus. And I guess, this kind of points to how we can read people's bodies. And you see a person who has a more angular, wiry, tense body, and they don't have the soft lines. And it never occurred to me before that there might be a hormonal component to this, right?
If a guru is sitting in front of you or standing in front of you, and he says, I have been gurating for the last 25 years, and I've been in touch with the universe, and he doesn't have a Buddha belly, there's something wrong.
Wow. I have to rethink everything.
But I'm not real big on gurus anyway. I'm pretty cynical about them.
Well, we were also going to touch on the subject of organ transplant.
Yes.
I have been privy to one of those situations as well, and I was a bit surprised to learn how, in the case of kidneys, how it's done, and the rate of success of organ transplant in the double kidney cadaver donor situation is actually very low. It's 50%. And the system offers you a redo. If it doesn't work the first time, your cadaver kidneys can be replaced by 2 other cadaver kidneys, and then even a third time. And what I learned from my Googling was that in the case of double organ transplants, which are normally done for older people, they actually leave your original kidneys, or kidney if you only have one, attached in those higher spots. Remember I said that the kidneys are in the very most deep embedded area of our torso. And they bring in the new kidneys and put them lower down, just above the groin, and they are attached to the iliac arteries, because the aorta comes out and then it branches, because it's now headed toward your two lower extremities. So it branches into two, the iliac arteries. That's where those new kidneys are placed. And then they give you loads of what they call anti-rejection drugs, which are actually also called immunosuppressant drugs.
Correct.
And what I learned about surgery is that every time they cut into the body, they follow the scalpel with an electrocautery tool. And
Yes.
they cauterize. So they're cutting, burning through all these layers of tissues. And that to me it's insult to injury, because not only they want to control the bleeding, that's the purpose of doing the cauterization. But I was in an OR once. I was witnessing a quadruple bypass, and the smell of this flesh burning was terrible.
Yeah.
So, it was a very interesting operation to see, but now you're the one who told me of a study that has kind of rendered the whole bypass thing to be somewhat moot as well. You want to tell the listeners about that?
Cardiovascular bypass surgery, thoracic bypass surgery, is one of the two big cash cows that keeps hospital systems and medical systems afloat. The other one is chemotherapy. We know that chemotherapy is a fraud. We know that people who don't have chemotherapy live longer than people who do have chemotherapy. We know that chemotherapy causes new cancers. We know that the entire cancer industry is built on deceit and conscious lies, that it is not an honorable industry in error. And one of the ways we know that is that chemotherapists, when asked whether they would use chemotherapy if they or a loved one had a malignancy, invariably more than 90% of them say no, they would not. And they're the ones who are administering and selling chemotherapy, so they know it's a fraud. But in addition to chemotherapy being a cash cow keeping hospital systems and medical systems afloat, the other one is bypass surgery. Now, in the early days of bypass surgery, there were people who said, that doesn't make any sense. You take a few inches of vessel from another part of the body, typically the femoral artery, and you replace the diseased piece of vessel in the heart, and you don't deal with the underlying cause of why the vessel became compromised in the first place. That doesn't make any sense. And then, typically, either the heart builds new connections around the new vessel or the old vessel, or the whole thing requires a repeat process again. So what have you accomplished? Or then you put in a stent, you put in a spring that keeps things open, but the vessels are sick and the disease progresses. What are you accomplishing? And the answer is you're making money. So a study was done in which a large number of patients, a significant number of patients, were given one of two procedures, and they didn't know which. They either had a sham operation in which the incision was made and in which a vessel was moved around, but superficially, or so they had the pain of the operation, they had the experience of having been manipulated, they were in the OR, they were anesthetized, all those things were the same, or they had actual cardiovascular bypass surgery with the same incision and so on. And it turned out that the survival rate was significantly worse among the people who had the real cardiovascular bypass surgery than among people who had the same disease but didn't have the bypass surgery. And that makes really, really good sense when you consider what a horrible trauma bypass surgery is at every level, including emotional, and the depression and brain damage and loss of function at the psychological and neurological level from cardiovascular bypass surgery and the heart-lung machine and so on is significant. This is not a small thing. Anyway, these people did much better, and their disease healed. Their cardiovascular disease healed. But there's another way to heal disease, cardiovascular disease, and the very basic underlying problems that led to the compromise of the vessels, and that is called chelation, Chelation, and the best chelating agent is EDTA, which is a semi-synthetic amino acid, which is non-toxic, which is introduced IV or can be introduced as a liposome and swallowed, and it cleans out the vessels, but not just the few inches of cardiac vessel, it cleans out the entire system. So it's an anti-aging treatment. It increases neurological function, it increases stamina, it decreases a whole variety of the consequences of inflexible vessels. But of course, it doesn't make very much money, and it doesn't do anything for the entire surgical industry and all the pharmaceuticals that are sold with every bypass surgery, which is worth hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars per patient. So the next time a person is told you're a walking time bomb, you need cardiovascular surgery right now, bypass, triple bypass, what you should do is run, not walk, to the nearest chelating physician and say, how do we do this thing? Let's make my entire body well instead of doing a surgery which is going to compromise every function in my body but make somebody really, really a lot of money.
I wanted to ask you about EDTA when you said semi-synthetic. Can you explain that? Do you know what it stands for? I could Google it.
Ethylene diamino tetraacetic acid.
And why is it semi-synthetic?
Because the body doesn't make it and it doesn't occur in that form in nature. It has to be played with a little bit in a chemistry laboratory, but it's a widely used preservative. It's used in mayonnaise, it's used in other foods, it's non-toxic, it's a really beneficial thing to put into the blood supply. Now, if you just take a capsule of EDTA, and there are many so-called oral chelation agents, if you just take a capsule of that, the stomach will inactivate 95% of the EDTA before it gets out of the stomach. And so you've really lost the whole point of it and it won't work. But if you take it as either intravenously or as a liposome, which means that the molecules of EDTA are wrapped up in a little ball of a beneficial fat, usually a phospholipid. That tiny little ball with the EDTA in the center goes through the stomach wall, and then the most common enzyme in the body, called catalase, opens up the ball quite normally and non-toxically. The EDTA molecules float out where they can go do their work, and the heart and the brain and every other membrane system in the body is nourished by the phospholipid. So it's a really very, very good delivery system for EDTA. And 100% of the EDTA that you've ingested reaches the bloodstream so it can do its work. The other way to do it is to have an intravenous application of the EDTA, and I like that very much, except that it's time-consuming and expensive, but it does allow me as a chelating physician to give the person who is sitting there with the IV drip in their arm other nutrients, vitamin C, magnesium, manganese, vitamin E, and so on. So I can do more on a medical basis, but preventive health and treating blockages and inflexible vessels, liposomal EDTA is simply wonderful.
Well, is this something you can find in, for instance, drugstores or online? Is it sold?
You can find it online. It's one of the products that I intend to carry on our e-commerce site, which is nsfmarketplace.com, where we do have CBD, a miracle molecule, and we do have nanosilver 10 parts per million. But so far, I have not located the manufacturer who will make my formulation of EDTA and the other things that I want to put in there, but it's a work in progress. Anyway, you can find it online. Which one is liposomal EDTA?
I have heard of liposomal glutathione, which is also another, glutathione is a tricysteine amino acid formulation. It's what the body makes it. It's the body's master antioxidant, I learned, and it is very sticky. It has a sulfuric content, and it goes through the bloodstream like flypaper, and a lot of wastes stick to it, and then you poop it out. So glutathione is one of those molecules that can't be recycled by the body, but it has to be freshly made. And apparently you have to, if you take it orally, it's best absorbed when it's liposomal, like that, what you just described.
Actually, glutathione, vitamin C, vitamin E form, have you ever seen the Chinese acrobats where each one grasps the ankles of another one and they roll across the stage in this remarkable human hoop system? Well, think about that, and now think about glutathione, vitamin C, vitamin E as Chinese acrobats, because they recycle one another. Vitamin E recycles vitamin C. Vitamin C recycles vitamin E. Magnesium is at the center of the wheel, and glutathione can actually be recycled and recycling, reduced and oxidized in the same way that vitamin C and vitamin E can be. But you have to have enough magnesium, enough vitamin E, enough vitamin C on board with the cysteine that is the critical limiting factor in glutathione.
That's great to know, and you're so good at making those pictures.
Thank you.
Even though in the podcast that I'm going to be posting, people won't be seeing what you do with your hands. But with all respect, I just wanted to mention when you were explaining bypass surgery, they don't use the femoral artery. They use the saphenous vein.
Sorry. My error. I said it wrong.
Yeah, internal mammary artery, which is an artery they claim we don't need, and it's in the chest. It's a short artery, the IMA. And then, of course, when they take out the vein, a lot of time when you see people who've had bypass, especially if it's multiple bypass, you'll see a long scar on their leg.
Exactly.
It's another
I'm glad you caught that error. As I said it, I thought, that's not right, and I didn't go back to it. Of course, it's the saphenous vein. The sham operation that was done used the IMA, the internal mammary artery, and what they did was just move it around so that there would also be disruption in the blood flow in the experimental placebo subjects as well as in the experimental real operation subjects. And the subjects did not know whether they had had the sham operation or the real operation. So when you see that their coronary disease got better when nobody got near their heart with a scalpel, or a cautery, that's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I learned from Dr. Daniels, Jennifer Daniels, who I also have interviewed, that 33% of the time, if you do nothing, you may get better.
Pretty much whatever the disease is. 33% of the time, if you do nothing, you may get better. But if you do something smart, nutritionally and in terms of detoxification and the other things that we have at our command, including CBD and nanosilver and nutrients like magnesium. If you do something smart, then you're going to get better much more than 33% of the time. I want to point out that it is illegal in the United States through Act of Congress, the 1994 Dietary Supplements Health and Education Act, or DSHEA. It is illegal to combine the following words with any nutrient, supplement, herb, or other natural product. And the words are prevent, treat, diagnose, or cure. And then the FDA, that's the Fraud and Death Administration, added the word mitigate. So it is illegal to say the following thing. For instance, cancer is prevented by adequate vitamin C, or cancer is treated by vitamin C, or cancer is cured by vitamin C. Now, the fact that those are true statements doesn't change the fact that they're illegal. Illegal, not just frowned upon, but illegal in the United States, which I thought had a First Amendment, but clearly I made a mistake.
Well, they have so many codes. Anything that's legal is just pretty much supported by either legislation or one of their 600,000 codes. And we can't possibly memorize or know all their different codes. If you're actually walking around town and there's a sign that says, no dogs pooping here, and then they'll list the code, or bicycles only here. It'll be such and such, the town municipal code number, blah, blah, blah. Now, when you violate that code, you can be cited, given a ticket. You will have to pay a penalty. And in the case of this illegality of things, it's usually remedied by money, right?
Sometimes. In a tyranny, and this is true of every tyranny of which I am aware, one of the techniques that the tyranny employs is to have so many codes, regulations, laws, and restrictions that everybody is violating something all the time, and no matter what they do or don't do. And therefore, it is possible to selectively enforce any or some of these codes, or all of them, and accomplish what you want, the suppression, incarceration, impoverishment, or control of anybody under any circumstances. This is one of the established techniques of tyranny.
Sorry, I muted for a second. You're right.
I'm sorry.
Yes, and absolutely. And, often remedied by money, but sometimes they're considered illegal to the point of criminality. And that's what is particularly distressing, because there are more and more people who are attempting to help others from a very sincere, heartfelt place.
Feeding the homeless on the street is now a crime in many places.
Well, there you go. There you go. I mean, I know that feeding squirrels is against municipal codes. I've seen those signs, but I guess it extends to the homeless as well. And honestly, with some of the bills they've passed in the House that are not being enforced, to my knowledge, but, if you're an organic gardener and you have tomatoes and beans and lettuce in your garden and you don't use commercial pesticides, you are not allowed technically to give your tomatoes and your lettuce and your beans. You're not allowed to share them with anybody.
Now, this is a problem with tomatoes, lettuce, and beans, but it's a disaster with zucchini. If you've ever grown zucchini, you know that the problem is, oh my God, I've got another crop of zucchini. Now what do I do with it? Everybody in the neighborhood has all the zucchini they can handle from me.
Well, I know. My friend used to get these huge zucchinis, and he made zucchini burgers where the slices of the zucchini, which were 4 or 5 inches across, were the bun.
Okay? Oh, wow.
So there's an idea. Just grow them big and have zucchini burgers. Well, are there any other areas that you might like to zoom into in our discussion today?
Yes, I would like to zoom into the fact that the entire issue of organ transplant, which actually we didn't talk very much about, the entire issue of organ transplant is deeply fraught with every kind of ethical, legal, scientific, and psychological problem that you can imagine, and yet there's virtually no discussion of these problems. Now, there is a series of documentaries, for instance, about the Chinese organ system, which is to murder people while they are alive, especially Falun Gong people, for their organs, sequentially harvesting them, and finally taking the ones that you can't live without last, without anesthesia. And this is an open secret in China, which, by the way, about 2 weeks ago, China said they finally would address. It was policy to punish the Falun Gong adherents. And we think of that as unthinkable. Where do organs come from? Where do our organs come from? How is organ donation protected from becoming a system of convenient murder? How does that work? How are we protected in any way from that? If somebody rich, powerful, or well-connected needs an organ and I'm in a hospital, how am I protected? And I think that's an open area that society needs to discuss very, very clearly and very openly.
Yeah, I think you left out the word moral. It's a moral problem as well, you know.
Well, I think I said ethical, which is similar, yes. But yes, it is. It is a deep moral question.
Yes. And there's, you know, I came across a distinction. You may not see it this way, but it makes sense to me that the difference between ethical and moral, ethics are your own, personal ethics. Morals are shared by the society, the community around you.
All right, fair enough.
Both of those, yeah. So, yeah, you're right. And I've heard that, you know, with organ transplants, you are at a teetering point, life or death. And if you have deemed yourself an organ donor, should anything happen to you, there is someone who hovers over you, a surgeon usually, and who makes the decision that you're not going to make it. And that's the point at which certain vital organs are removed.
Or who makes the decision to make sure that you're not going to make it.
Well, that's true. That's part of it too. Yes. I mean, I'm not going to split hairs in that, you know, analysis of what that decision is, but you're absolutely right. And honestly, I don't think people realize that. There are a lot of people who have very blithely listed themselves on their driver's license, as you can here in California, as an organ donor. And they don't realize that somebody is going to make a very crucial, the most crucial decision possible about them at some point, if that's ever, you know, an eventuality.
Let's ask whether money might be involved. Let's ask whether a surgeon or a surgical team or a hospital director or someone might not be pressured to find that organ, whether or not you, the organ donor, the good-hearted organ donor, were actually in a life and death situation. Maybe you were in a life and life situation, but somebody needs your heart. And that somebody is well-heeled, well-connected, and has put out the necessary economic inducements. Do you really want to give up your life so that the director of the hospital or the organ transplant system or whomever can make $10,000? Really? Is that okay with you? Or your husband or your wife or your child? Really? Is that okay with you? Because oddly enough, it's not okay with me. I guess I'm not really very public spirited.
No, you're not. And I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to go a little deeper than I did in our discussion before. But it's always baffled me how, let's say, all the questions you just posed and the issues have been addressed properly, morally, whatever. And let's say they have harvested an organ or a set of organs from somebody, and that person has effectively reached death. Once they do that, it's all over. Once they take your heart or your liver, it's going to be over for you. So how do they preserve those organs until such time as the organs meet their new recipient? How do they preserve them?
They plunge them into very cold preservative solutions, and they have transportation technology worked out quite well. They either hop on a plane, or they race across town, or they do whatever it is that's scheduled to be done. I believe, and I may not be completely up to date in this, but I believe that most organs can be kept in a state of viability for about 24 hours in these cold systems, cold pumping systems. 24 hours is pretty much long enough to reach most places on the planet from wherever you are.
Okay, so the viability extends for about 24 hours.
To my knowledge.
Nutrient bath, I think that was the word you used the last time, this preservative solution.
A cold nutrient bath.
It actually keeps the organs, don't they have to have blood supply, oxygenation? Don't they need those things for less than 24 hours, certainly?
Well, you think about a fish tank. You put nutrients into the water, you pump the water around, the fish get oxygen because there's a bubbler. These are very easy things to do technologically.
Okay. So what about I guess you're saying that the matrix in which the organs are kept has enough going on in it that the semi-permeable state of the organ cell wall will absorb enough support for a short amount of time.
Yes.
Especially if their environmental temperature is lowered and their functionality is dropped. It goes, it's like a bear in hibernation.
Exactly.
Well, you know what? Very clever of them to have figured that much out.
Very clever. With that much money involved, of course they're going to figure it out.
And then they go to the recipient and they do the attachment. And
the recipient's on very expensive drugs for the rest of their life. That's good. And they have all kinds of problems. When you suppress the immune system, you're going to have infections. When you have infections, you need more drugs. You need more procedures. You need more treatment. You need another organ. You need who knows what all. Now, that's not to say that there might not be circumstances in which this whole thing makes some kind of sense. But the abuse is so easy and so lucrative and so hidden that society needs to have an open and very cynical discussion of what indeed is possible and what is real. Now, today I read that China's government has announced that all internet news services with their own reporting teams have been forced to shut them down, and that the only news available on the internet henceforward in China is the news that comes directly from the government. China's not going to have an open discussion of its organ transplant market. Are we headed the same way?
Very possibly. May I ask you about smaller things like valves, like pig valve? How does that work? What's the ethics around that? Or
bowels, did you say?
No, valve.
Oh, valves. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, pig valves. If I needed a new valve and I had the choice of having a valve from a human being or from a pig, and there were no difference in the outcome and the consequences for me. Both required immune suppressant drugs for the rest of my life. Both required this and that and the other thing. I certainly would rather have a pig valve, just as I would rather have pig skin than the skin from either a cadaver or a living human being. It seems to me, and I am not one of those people who is horrified under all circumstances by the use of animals to the service of human beings. I eat meat. I prefer to eat meat that is ethically raised and humanely slaughtered, and of course meat that's fed wholesome food during its life, because if I'm eating it, I'd rather have healthy animals as my food than sick animals. There are some people who say, no, 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 I would rather use human parts than animal parts, because animals have to be treated with more respect. Those are decisions that people in society have to make for themselves. I think everybody, any animal, any human being, needs to be treated humanely, needs to be treated with respect to its life and the quality of life and the quality of its death. But would I reject, if I had to have a choice between a human valve and a pig valve under those two sets of circumstances that I laid out, would I reject the pig valve? No, because I'd rather see the heart of the pig dissected than the heart of a human being dissected, assuming that the pig is probably less sentient than the human being.
All right. And I wanted to mention, while we were on the subject of the racket, that these transplant operations are operations in general. I was speaking to someone shortly after we had our last long conversation, and she told me that her mentor, she's a very talented nutritionist, but she told me that her mentor at one point was a surgical assistant, and he, attended surgeries in ORs. And he said often they'd open up a person, look inside, and say, oh no, with dismay, because they didn't want to deal with what they were looking at, sew the person up, announce that the surgery had been done successfully, and bill for it.
Well, that was interesting. When we were talking about the sham surgery with the internal mammary artery being moved, I was wondering, as I was speaking, whether the insurance company and the individual were billed for a coronary bypass surgery with a heart-lung machine and so on and so on and so on. I don't have that information, but I'm not entirely surprised by that information. Do I throw my hands up in horror and say, no, no, it could not be, when I hear about corruption in the medical industry, in the pharmaceutical industry, which is the same thing? No, of course I don't. I understand the corruption is profound. Profound. If you don't ask for the surgical records and you don't ask for proof, and most people don't, how would you know? How would you know?
Exactly, and with the bonding that goes on in these, OR is a life and death situation. It really is.
Yes.
So with the loyalty that the staff might have for one another, and many times I know that I've known people who've worked in hospitals, and all the people who work a certain shift, they're like a family, especially ER and OR people.
Right.
They party together, they date each other, they marry each other. This is why you see so often doctors marrying nurses and nurses marrying, other people in the hospital, because it's a community. It's like a giant family, and they're very loyal and they're very bonded.
And there are disincentives to speaking out that are mammoth.
That too, yes. So, Dr. Rima, do you practice, when you talked about giving people IVs with the chelation materials in them, do you actually have a practice right now where you are, or is that just something you've done in the past?
Just before we signed on to this connection so that we could talk. I was in the process of reviewing a business plan for the creation of the Dr. Rima Institute here in Chile, where patients can come and they can have organic food on a prescriptive dietary basis provided for them, where they can have advanced healthcare without the FDA, by the way, but with a very, very sophisticated and first world culture that is Chile, supporting that environment in a perfectly exquisite location. So I am looking toward having that practice operating in the near future. However, I do consultations. I will talk to people on Skype, on the phone, and sometimes they come in person, but that's really not necessary. And I will review their medical records. I will make suggestions. I will make referral suggestions and so on. Because I think that the amount of information that I have accrued and the amount of clinical experience that I have accrued in almost 50 years of this kind of medical practice is really useful to a lot of people, and I'm happy to share it. If people want a consultation with me, they can send me an email to dr.rima, R-I-M-A, at naturalsolutionsfoundation.com, dr.rima at naturalsolutionsfoundation.com, with the word consult as the subject, and my staff and I will communicate with them and help them set that up. But we are very, very eager to create the Dr. Rima Institute here. And if people are interested in that, they can also send me an email with Institute as the subject and tell me what their interest is, and I'll be happy to share the plans as they develop. Maybe they're investors. That would be grand. Who knows?
That's very good news. I'm happy to hear that. And this is the first time I've seen Dr. Rima Lebo talking on Skype. My video isn't turned on, but I want to tell you, I'm doing a little math, and the almost 50 years of practice, and I guess you would have to be over 20 to have graduated from medical school. I'm looking at a face that doesn't look anywhere near that particular age.
Thank you. I'm 72 years old, and I have no medical problems, none whatsoever. I take no medication. I am robust and vital. I sleep 4 hours a night or less, quite happily, because I do what I tell people to do. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. And people say, no, I don't believe you're that age because you don't look that. I've had no face surgery, no facelift, nothing. It's called health. It's called vitality. It's called nutrition.
No, it shows. Unless you're wearing some saran wrap on your face or something.
No, not.
No. That was the first thing I said when you turned on your Skype. I said, oh my God, you look great. And I didn't, that was a natural, it was an outburst.
It was, that's true. Thank you. You know, premature aging is accepted as normal. It's not normal. It's normative. It is not normal to lose your sight. It is not normal to lose your hearing. It is not normal to be saggy and baggy. It is not normal to have cardiovascular disease and diabetes and arthritis. That is abnormal. That is normative because most people experience it, but it's abnormal. And it comes from poison food, poison environment. It comes from microwaves. It comes from allowing ourselves to be suffused by the things that are there to poison us. Or we can say no thank you and not do that.
Yeah, we can say no thank you. We can try to invest a little time and energy in educating ourselves, and then we can share our education, share our tips with friends and say, you know, this helped me. Why don't you try it? It doesn't cost a lot. And there you go. You know, a lot of these things that you in particular are so specialized in are not huge multi-million-dollar money makers.
No,
which is
they're
why,
not.
yes, which is why we need people with deep pockets to help to fund the Dr. Rima Institute. Seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. If you go to my website or my e-commerce site, which is nsfmarketplace.com, that stands for Natural Solutions Foundation, nsfmarketplace.com, you will find two very interesting classes of items. You will find nano silver 10 parts per million, and you will find CBD or cannabidiol products. Those two products together, Sophia, will offer people who use them, who understand them and take the time to think about it, the opportunity to replace, I estimate, about 95% of the pharmaceutical drugs that are killing us. They're inexpensive, they're natural, they're health-inducing, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, and they represent self-care options that are politically, psychologically, emotionally, biochemically, and physiologically incredibly profound. Or you can pop a pill.
Yeah. I love listening to you because you really have a very enveloping, deep, and meaningful way of expressing things. And that's not common today either. And it just reflects the bigness of your being, I think.
Thank you, Sophia. You're very, very kind and flattering. And I truly believe that the mission to share the solutions to the problems that we all face is a driving one for me and for my husband, the president of the foundation, and for Ralph Fusatola, the co-trustee of the foundation and the counsel to the foundation. That's why we do what we do. This is, I closed a very successful private practice of drug-free medicine to which people came from around the world in order to work full-time at health freedom advocacy, which means you own your own body. You determine what happens to it. You determine what goes into it. Clean food, clean water, no vaccines, whatever you choose. Or GMO food if you want that nonsense. Drugs if you want that. Your choice, but not someone else's choice. Because if it's not your choice, there is a very simple ancient word for what you are, and that word is slave. A slave is someone whose body is owned and whose conditions of physical integrity and everything else that goes around with it is owned by someone else. And if a corporation or a government can determine what happens to your body, you are in no way a free human being. Now, that is our first and most fundamental freedom, complete sovereignty over our own bodies and by extension our children's bodies. Is there a downside to that? Sure. Do people sometimes make mistakes? Sure. But especially with the internet, we have access to information, we have access to experts, we have access to data that we have never had access to before. So yeah, it might take a little work to learn what your body needs. Well, it's your body. It's worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so can you just tell me quickly where this practice was that you closed?
Yes, it was in Croton-on-Hudson, suburban New York City. I also had an office in Manhattan. So we had two offices, and quite literally people came from around the world. And it was quite a wonderful thing to work miracles on a daily basis that most physicians, allopathic physicians, never see in their entire career. People being cured of things that are supposedly incurable. They just have to learn to live with the pain or the discomfort, or there's nothing more we can do for you. Nonsense. Nonsense. I never figured out what incurable means. Sorry about that. That didn't work for me. There's always a way to find a way if people are willing to take the responsibility, change their diets, et cetera, et cetera. And so we decided, my husband and I, that it was more important to deal with the health of the body politic than with the health of the individuals. We sold our practice. We sold our home. We closed our practice. We didn't sell it. We closed our practice. We sold our home, and we devoted ourselves full-time in 2004 and onward to the health freedom of every single person on this planet. Why? Because if you know that evil is occurring and you do nothing, then you are part of the evil. And I could not live with the evil of globalization, depopulation, and the absolute suppression of human rights and do nothing except maybe protect myself in a little way. Maybe have a little hidey hole with clean food. No, 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 no. We are all connected to one another, and we are all responsible for doing what we do or not doing what we don't do. And so we closed our practice and created the Natural Solutions Foundation to derail the globalist agenda.
That's excellent. I'm so amazed. I'm so happy to hear it. And I want to ask one more question because my brain always nitpicks. It needs to know answers to things that pop up when you're talking. And so one last question I have for you is, you were trained in psychiatry principally, right?
I was. Indeed, I graduated from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in 1970, which I'm happy to say is still within living memory. And I took a residency in adult and community psychiatry. It was kind of a double residency program. And then I stuck around in training for a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship. So after medical school, I was in postgraduate training for 5 years. I also was trained as a psychoanalyst because I thought it was an extraordinarily important listening tool, and I needed to learn how to listen well. Psychoanalysis taught me that whether or not the conclusions of psychoanalysts and their understanding of the world was correct, their listening tool was superb, and I learned that. And then I've gone on from there. So I've really been following my own trajectory because I'm a really stiff-necked, stubborn person who doesn't tolerate idiocy, and there's, God knows, enough of that in medicine.
So as a person trained as a psychiatrist, how did that affect the interface that you had with patients? Did they wonder, why is this doctor telling me how to heal my whole body? Did you ever have any kind of impediment because your training was specifically with, let's call it, the brain-mind?
Well, initially the impediment was me because I thought I was supposed to see patients with psychiatric and neurological diagnoses, and that's what my practice was. And then I started learning new techniques and technologies in order to help heal without any kind of drug interference, any kind of drug, because in all those years I've never written a prescription for drug treatment. I once wrote a prescription to wean a patient off Xanax, but that's the only pharmaceutical prescription I've ever written in almost 50 years of practice, which is, I think, a record. So I was treating patients, and then I learned about neurobiofeedback, and it was in its early stages. And I went on to start applying the technique and using neurobiofeedback in my practice. And I was treating people who were depressed and had post-traumatic stress disorder and had head injury and, the usual psychiatric stuff. And people started coming to me who were their friends with diseases that were, quote, non-psychiatric, or conditions that were non-psychiatric. And so, for instance, a woman with scleroderma, which is an autoimmune destruction process, came to me, and she was blind in one eye and was going blind in the second eye because the scleroderma plaque was severing her optic nerve. And she said, "Can you help me?" I said, "I have no idea, but I will try. And if you're game, we will see what we can do. And I'll use everything I know to help you." Well, in 9 days, the scleroderma plaque that was severing her optic nerve dissolved. And the only thing that we were doing was neurobiofeedback 3 times a week. That was pretty amazing. And then similar things started happening. I had a diabetic who was on insulin for more than 20 years, who was in a wheelchair, who had diabetic neuropathy that nothing could touch. The pain was so unbearable. I had him stop needing any kind of insulin injections whatsoever after about 3 months of neurobiofeedback. No other changes. I started writing papers on head injury recovery, on various other kinds of recovery, and I didn't understand how it was working at all. And so I called a French scientist friend of mine who was a toxicologist, and toxicologists do statistics. He was also the head of INRA, the chief scientist of what would be the equivalent of the USDA. And I said, look, Michelle, I need you to come to the United States for 2 weeks because I know the answers in my data, but I'm only able to deliver miracles to 85% of the people who are coming to my office. I think if I understood why the miracles were occurring, I could deliver the miracles to 100% of the patients who are coming to my office. So I need you to come and extract the information from the data, the statistical data in the records. And he said, okay. Now, it wasn't a 2-week process. I was wrong. It took 11 years and nearly 50 scientific papers before we figured out what was going on. What was going on was that setting the intentionality to be completely well, as Bruce Lipton was later to write about in The Biology of Belief, literally changed the reality of the body, the brain, the mind, the heart, if you will, the soul. And it created profound, measurable, physiological, and neurological wellness that is not supposed to be possible. That's an interesting story by itself. But meanwhile, I was learning more about nutrition and detoxification and frequency medicine and yada, 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 constantly. That's medicine. That's science. That's not allopathic practice.
Excellent.
This has been wonderful fun, Sofia. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and to share some thoughts. What a delight.
Well, you're very welcome.